This is the continuation of November part 1 of November part 2 of the Wednesday Wars. And you still have 2 questions. What did Holling remember when he saw the cream puffs? And what does Holling get a part in? Not such a good beginning, she said, looking down at my bleeding test. The quality of mercy is not strained, I said. She looked up at me and almost smiled a real smile. Not a teacher's smile. Think of it, Mrs. Baker almost smiling a real smile. Nothing so much as a pound of flesh is at stake, she told me. But you could have fooled me. Maybe it was mercy, or maybe I just needed to get into the rhythm of the thing. But after the first 4 wrong, the rest went pretty well, and the gushing blood slowed to a trickle. And then, for the last 30 questions in a row, a complete stop. You've coagulated, Mr. Hoodhood, Mrs. Baker said, which I think is a Caliban curse that I might have missed. For next week, we'll review what you missed, and read The Tempest again. Read The Tempest again? I said. I mean, you can understand reading Treasure Island 4 times, but no matter how good a Shakespeare play is, no one reads it twice. You'll find there's a lot more to The Tempest than a list of colorful curses. Read The Tempest again? I said. Repetition is not always a rhetorical virtue, said Mrs. Baker. Yes, read it again, from the start. So, it had turned out to be an all right Wednesday afternoon, after all, except for the internal bleeding, and except for the 150-question test, and except for having to read The Tempest again from the start. But as I limped home, I figured that if I read an act that night, and another on Thursday, and Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, I would have it all finished pretty painlessly, and each one would probably go a lot quicker, since I'd already read them all once. Life got brighter, and somehow the world suddenly got brighter too. You know how this is? You're walking along, and then the sun comes out from behind a cloud, and the birds start to sing, and the air is suddenly warm. It's like the whole world is happy because you're happy. It's a great feeling, but never trust it, especially in November on Long Island. Because as I limped past Goldman's Best Bakery, the front window was filled with cream puffs, brown, light, perfect cream puffs. And I remembered the death threats. So that is number 6. They were still hanging over me, like Shylock's knife hanging over Antonio's chest. I decided that, to be safe, I'd better get those cream puffs, even if it meant asking for an advance on my allowance, which I had about as much chance of getting as Shylock had of getting his ducats back. Still, I thought I might have a chance when Dad got home that evening and let out the great news. Hoodhood and Associates architecture firm had won the Baker Sporting Emporium store's contract. They were going to design a new main store and redesign every single one of the chain stores, and there were plenty of them, one in almost every town on Long Island. He grabbed my mother and twirled her around, and they danced beneath the newly plastered ceiling of the living room. Can you believe it? They went into the perfect living room. Then they danced through the kitchen, back to the perfect living room, and out onto the front stoop, down the stairs, and past the embarrassed, burlapped azaleas. Let me tell you, when Presbyterians start to dance on the front stoop, you know something big has happened. We got the contract, we got the contract, we got the contract, my father sang. It sounded like he was waiting for a full string orchestra to come in, something out of The Sound of Music. When he swept back inside, pirouetting my mother, it seemed the perfect moment to ask, Dad, could I have an advance on my allowance next week? We got the contract, we got the contract, not on your sweet life, we got the contract. That night, I dreamed that Caliban sat at the foot of my bed, looking a lot like Danny Hupfer and telling me how I was going to end up all scurvy and blistered if I didn't get the cream puffs next week. The end of the 3 weeks I had promised. Beware, beware, he said, and I decided I should. So on Friday, I went to Goldman's Best Bakery and put $2.45 on the counter, which was all the money I had in the world. $2.45 can buy a great deal, said Mr. Goldman. So what is it you want to buy? 22 cream puffs, I said. Mr. Goldman added up 22 cream puffs in his head. For that, you need $2 more and 80 cents. I need the cream puffs by next week. You still need $2 more and 80 cents. I can work. I can wash dishes and stuff. I should need you to wash dishes? I have 2 good hands. They can wash dishes too. I don't have to pay them. I could sweep and clean up. Mr. Goldman held up his 2 good hands again. I sighed. You don't need anything done around here? What I should really need, he said, is a boy who knows Shakespeare. But is there a boy who knows Shakespeare these days? No, not one. You would think that they should teach Shakespeare in school, but do they? No. Okay, I'm not kidding here. Mr. Goldman really said that. What I should really need is a boy who knows Shakespeare. Those words came out of his mouth. I know Shakespeare, I said. Sure you do, Mr. Goldman said. You still need $2 more and 80 cents. I do know Shakespeare. Mr. Goldman put his hands on his hips. Show me some Shakespeare then. I went back to The Tempest, and not just the Caliban curses either, which is all that Mrs. Baker thought I knew. I spread my arms out wide. Now does my project gather to a head, my charms crack not, my spirits obey, and time goes upright with his carriage. How is the day? Mr. Goldman clapped his hands, really, and then he leaped upon a stool behind the counter, and Mr. Goldman is not someone whose size encourages leaping. He clapped his hands again above his head, and a fine, light flowering flew into the air, sort of like chalk dust, and a haze shimmered about his face. His voice changed, and when he spoke, it was as though he was chanting a high and faraway music. On the 6th hour, at which time, my lord, you said our work would cease. I spread my arms out even wider and tried to imagine long robes with sleeves that flowed down along the arms of Prospero. I did say so when first I raised the tempest. Say, my spirit, how fares the king and his followers? Is not easy to say, but it came off pretty well, with about as much spit as beetles. Mr. Goldman clapped his hands again, and another shimmering of flower fell. Confined together in the same fashion as you gave in charge, just as you left them. Mr. Goldman climbed down from the stool and held out his still flowery hand. His smile pushed his cheeks into round lumps. And that was how I got a part in the Long Island Shakespeare Company's holiday extravaganza. And that is number 7, which was opening next month. And it's also how I got 22 cream puffs for $2.80 less than I should have, plus 2 more free, since they come cheaper by the dozen. And it was a good thing. So, tomorrow we'll read November Part 3.